Please welcome Chris Knobbe.
Fellow colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today I will present and defend a hypothesis which holds that the seed oils, the vegetable oils, are the primary drivers of overweight, obesity, and virtually all of our chronic westernized diseases: heart disease, hypertension, stroke, cancers, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, age-related macular degeneration, all the autoimmune diseases, and the list goes on and on and on. You will see in country after country that it is not sugars, carbohydrates, fat, animal fat, saturated fat, animal protein, meat, or anything else that's been implicated in these epidemics of obesity and chronic disease we see popping up all around the world. However, you will see that it is the vegetable oils that are the major drivers, because they are the hidden and pernicious destroyers of metabolism, destroyers of people, destroyers of nations. How do they do this? They're highly pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient deficient. You put those four pillars of hazard together and you have the recipe for widespread metabolic destruction and chronic disease. That's how they accomplish this. Vegetable oils represent the single greatest transformational change to the diet of mankind in all of history. They're the single greatest component of processed foods on a caloric basis, and we all know processed foods are devastating. And as you'll see, wherever they go, vegetable oils leave behind a massive trail of destruction. So let's go to the Renaissance. So the great physician and alchemist Paracelsus said, all that man needs for health and healing has been provided by God in nature. The challenge of science is to find it. A few hundred years later, in the 19th century, Thomas Edison, American inventor, wrote, "The doctor of the future will give no medication but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." And then in 1939, Weston A. Price, whom many consider the father of nutrition, including myself, wrote, "Life in all its fullness is Mother Nature obeyed." So we've hundreds of years of recommendations from some of the leading minds in the world about consuming nature's foods, right? So does anybody know what this is? Now, if you guess this is a petroleum refinery, you're pretty close. This is a vegetable oil refinery. And the question is does this look like we're obeying nature with something that comes out of this? Does anybody have one of these in your kitchen at home? You know, so this is another vegetable oil refinery. And you may not realize it, but vegetable oils require an intense mechanical heat and chemical process to produce them. In fact, the seeds that go through these are crushed, heated, pressed, run through a hydraulic press under high temperature and pressure, then treated to a petroleum-derived hexane solvent bath, steamed, degummed, chemically alkalinized, chemically bleached, and chemically deodorized before they're ready to go into the bottle. So they're highly oxidized and dangerous when they hit the bottle typically, but if they are not, they will oxidize further when you heat them, when you cook with them, and when you metabolize them. So you'll end up with toxic aldehydes, advanced lipid oxidation end products with these. But this is the most important thing to realize today is that in Western societies, we're consuming somewhere about 1/8 to 1/3 of our calories coming from seed oils. And guess what? They didn't exist in 1865, or at least on an incredibly small scale globally. So, question is, are these the healthy fats? Or are these poisons? And my charge to you today is that these are chronic metabolic biological poisons. And I'll show you more evidence about this today. I won't have much time to talk about the pathophysiology. I've covered that many times in other presentations. Now, in the United States, we have many organizations recommending these, including our most touted, esteemed institutions like Harvard, School of Medicine, Tufts University Nutrition Department, Mayo Clinic's Nutrition Department, the American Heart Association, and many more, all recommending these unsaturated fats, the seed oils, right? Unfortunately, even the World Health Organization still recommends consuming unsaturated fats, seed oils, vegetable oils. And they recommend keeping our saturated fat to under 10% of calories and, again, consume more unsaturated fats. That means vegetable oils. Now, how's it working for us? Well, I'm from the U.S. We are leading the whole world in obesity, right? We're winning the war, right? We're winning on this. And guess what? We consume more seed oils per capita than any other nation in the world. Do you suppose it's just coincidence? Now, are we healthy? I think not. This comes out of our own nation. We might be the most unhealthy country in the world, and I would argue that we are. And there's plenty of evidence for that, again. But we're consuming the most seed oils per capita of any nation in the world. Do you suppose it's coincidence? I don't. And I don't think you will either at the end of this. So, with all this recommendation, are we just sheep being let off the cliff? Well, so why are these authorities recommending seed oils? And in 60 years of evidence and studies, I believe it all comes down to this. They lower cholesterol. And indeed they do. But guess what? So does arsenic. And you may think this is fantastically unfair, but I assure you it really is not, because arsenic kills through oxidation. Well, seed oils kill us and maim us primarily through oxidation. Inflammation cannot hold a candle to oxidation. And as I said, I won't have a lot of time to go into all the pathophysiology today, but this is, again, no matter how you dress up arsenic or seed oils, they're still chronic biological poisons. Now, you just pause here just for a moment, give my financial disclosures, even though this is not for CME. I just want you to know I am a book author, I'm a researcher, and I'm the director of Cure AMD Foundation and Ancestral Health Foundation. I accept no compensation for any of these roles, and neither does anyone in our organizations. We're volunteers because we believe in this mission. And I have a personal disclosure. Some of you may have known me or seen me before, and in fact, just last year, I looked more like this, and if you notice, I decided to color my hair white. And I got tired of looking so young, and so I decided I wanted to look a little older. And that's not true at all. That's my only lie today, though, or at least my only planned lie. And what actually, I want to tell you this story just very briefly. This is me, the year I graduated from high school, 1979. I was 18 years old here, but 4 years before this, I started going gray. And by the time I was 18, I couldn't cover up the gray anymore, and I started coloring my hair. And then when I was in my 30s, I started getting arthritis. And in my 40s, I started getting fatigue. And I had all these symptoms that ultimately led me to do what I'm doing today. It was to try to figure out what was wrong with me. And I ultimately found out I was very iron deficient without anemia and had some other deficiencies like magnesium. But anyway, if you ever see people have premature graying or balding, think about these deficiencies, okay? Now, back to the talk. All right. So I will submit to you there's two fundamental drivers of obesity and chronic disease at the physiologic level, and that is nutrient deficiency and toxicity. Where does that come from? One thing, processed foods. It's that simple. Okay, I know we're at the 50,000 foot view here. All right, but what are processed foods? They really boil down to these four things: refined flours, refined and added sugars, seed oils, vegetable oils, which they're better termed seed oils. None of them come from vegetables. All right, and then finally artificially produced trans fats, like what came originally from Crisco. But this is processed food essentially. And when you put those four foods together, that's what lines our grocery store aisles primarily. So we can call it a cake, a cookie, a pastry, or whatever. It's primarily these things. But guess what? It is the high PUFA, the highly polyunsaturated fatty acid vegetable oils that are the fat of choice for these foods, and also for the fast foods and restaurant foods. They're not cooking or producing these products with lard, butter, and beef tallow animal fats. All right? Now, this is my list of the worst of these oils, and I'll just say it: soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, and rice bran. There are others, but this is my list of the worst of the worst. And no matter how pretty they look, these are chronic metabolic biological poisons. Now, very briefly, just for a minute, I want to take you go back 200 years with the history of what's going on in the world in nutrition. And I'm going to start with the United States, because the world rather followed what we did, unknowingly or not. Anyway, so those four things. Sugar has been in the diet for hundreds of years, but between 1822 and 1999, sugar went up 17-fold. Went from 6 pounds per person per year to 108 pounds per person per year. It's a nutrient deficient food. Cottonseed oil, the first vegetable oil introduced in the United States, 1866. The Americas, Europe, most of the world had never seen, tasted a vegetable oil until the late 19th century, right? And then in 1880, roller mill technology gave us refined white wheat flour, a nutrient deficient food. And then in 1911, Procter & Gamble in the United States gave us good old Crisco trans fats. That right there is processed food. They're all in place by 1911. All right? So by 2009, in the US, those four ultra-processed foods make up 63% of the diet. This is what, if you just eliminate these, you've probably fixed 97% of your problems. So that's the big picture. Now, chronic disease looks something like this, and I think it looks like this globally, which I'll get to later. Now, let's focus on the vegetable oils. This is our published data from 2017. Now, if you go back to 1865, you can see there was no consumption of vegetable oils. They began right after the American Civil War in 1866. They ran about 1 or 2 grams a day, usually about 1 gram a day until 1909. Then we got soybean oil, and then this exploded with all these other oils. And by 2010, we're at 80 grams per person per day. 80 grams, ladies and gentlemen, is 720 calories, 32% of U.S. caloric intake, virtually a third of Americans' food coming from these oils, which did not exist in 1865. Now, think of it this way. In 1900, when we were fantastically healthy, and I'll get to some of this, when we didn't have hardly any chronic disease, 99% of our added fats came from animal fat, lard, butter, and beef tallow. But by 2005, 86% of our added fats came from vegetable oils. 86%. So vegetable oils almost completely supplanted and replaced animal fats in terms of added fat. Now, the U.S. Dietary Guidelines, 1980, the finger's been pointed at these many times, that this is when we went low fat, higher carb, right? And this was the problem. To me, this is not when the problem began in 1980. As you can see, vegetable oils were still going up. Even though the fat was going down, total fat was going down, vegetable oils still on their way up. This is not where the problem began. It began way back here in 1866 when these entered the food supply. And Americans didn't want these. Most of the world didn't want these. So in fact, they couldn't hardly sell cottonseed oil because the people knew it was being used as machine oil and lamp oil. They didn't want to eat that, right? Okay, so what they do, they snuck it into margarines, and then they started adulterating olive oil. All right? Today, seed oils and factory farmed animals, mostly pork and chicken, that are fed corn and soy, they develop very high omega-6, and this is where we're getting our omega-6. So 93% of our omega-6 linoleic acid, that's the primary omega-6 fat, is coming from this, 93% today. So what did this do to us? So we're looking at just omega-6 linoleic acid, again the primary omega-6, which is around 80 to 90% of your total omega-6. This is where we were in 1865 in the U.S., 2.2 grams a day. We've modeled the consumption at that point. 2.2 grams is 1% of our total consumption. Okay, this is where we should be. 1909, we're at 4.84 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid, or LA. That's 2% of calories. Why is it higher? Because we had cottonseed oil and soybean oil. All right, now we get all the others. 1999, we're at 18 grams a day, 7% of calories. 2008, we're at 29 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid alone, 11.8% of calories, just rounded off about 12%. Okay? Now, that's a 12-fold increase in omega-6 in about 145 years, whether you measure it by mass or by percentage. Is this a problem? Some people will say, no, LA is essential. It's an essential fat. You have to have it. Indeed, you absolutely must have it. How do you get it? Eat any kind of food. You only need 0.35 to 0.5% of omega-6 linoleic acid to meet all your requirements. Unless you're an infant, you might need up to 2%, 1 or 2% as an infant. All right, so if you eat oranges or apples or bananas or white rice or almost any other food, you will get all the linoleic acid you need. You'll meet your requirements. All right? Paracelsus said, all things are poison and nothing is without poison. The dose alone makes sure that a thing is not poison. Translated, the dose makes the poison, right? Let's apply this to linoleic acid. So where were we in 1865? 1% of our calories, right, which we just saw. So that's 1/100th of our calories, 1865, was linoleic acid. Where are we in 2008? 1/8 of our calories in the U.S. All right, is that a problem? Optimal consumption, which I've shown many times before in all ancestral societies, was less than 2% of calories. All right, so is this a problem? You bet it is. This makes this a metabolic poison. Why is that? Coming to that next. First, it accumulates in our body fat. Okay? This is Stephen Guyenet's published research. 37 collated studies of body fat linoleic acid in Americans. Where were we in 1959? 9.1% linoleic acid. Where were we in 2008? 21.5% linoleic acid. All right, so you can see it's on a steady incline, right? Let's look at this in relation to the vegetable oil consumption. This is where we put those numbers on that curve, right? Is there a relationship? You bet there is. A mathematical relationship. In fact, whatever the linoleic acid, omega-6 linoleic acid is in your body, in your food, will end up in your body fat at about twice the level. So if you consume 5% linoleic acid in your diet, you'll end up with about 8 to 12% in your body fat. And 10% in your diet, you'll end up with probably 18 to 22% in your body fat. Why is this a problem? If it's more than 2% in your diet, guess what? Now we're back to those 4 hazards. Highly pro-oxidative, it's like we're rusting inside. All right, pro-inflammatory, this has been covered a million times. It's toxic because omega-6 linoleic acid breaks down into advanced lipid oxidation end products, ALEs. Things like 4-hydroxynonenal, malondialdehyde, carboxyethyl pyrrole, acrolein, and hundreds of others. Like smoking cigarettes produces more than 6,000 chemicals, mutagens, carcinogens. When you consume seed oils, they break down into hundreds of different advanced lipid oxidation end products. Most of those we don't even know the names of, but they're dangerous to us. All right, finally, all the oils are nutrient deficient. They have no vitamins A, D, or K2. All animal fats, lard, butter, beef tallow, carry the critical vitamins, vitamins A, D, and K2. So you become deficient in these without the animal fats, right? All this ultimately leads to metabolic disease and physical degeneration. And you know what goes along with this? Insulin resistance and mitochondrial dysfunction. And I presented on this at Ancestral Health Symposium 2019. I went through all the mechanisms for this. I don't have time today. It takes about 10 minutes to get through that. It's a complicated pathway, but this is how we end up with mitochondrial dysfunction and why mitochondrial dysfunction and insulin resistance ties together all of these diseases, all of them. Okay, so let's look at the evidence. We'll start with the United States. This is what I call a nutrition experiment and what Weston A. Price called in nature's laboratory. You can't study diets in people for long periods of time. You can't control it, right? The longest they've controlled diets in people is a few months because you have to put them in a metabolic ward and make them prisoners of the ward to control their diet. So how do you do it? You have to do it in nature's laboratory. So let's look at this. So this is vegetable oils. This is our published data from 2017. This is vegetable oils in the black down there at the bottom versus heart disease deaths in the red curve. Notice the extraordinary relationship there? But look at the saturated fat. It's flat. It went up no more than 5 grams over the entire century. All right, 1 teaspoon worth of fat. And by other accounts, other evidence suggests that saturated fat even went down. So we have a very strong correlation here to heart disease. Some people say, well, they're blaming it on meat. Let's look at meat consumption in the United States. So this goes back more than 200 years. Look at the first half of this curve shows the meat consumption going down in the 19th century. All right, but coronary heart disease was virtually unknown. There's 8 papers in the United States, in the world, on coronary heart disease and coronary embolism, heart attacks in the 19th century. All right, it's practically unknown. 1912 in the U.S., first documented heart attack with autopsy evidence. 1930s, heart disease becomes the leading cause of death, right at the nadir of meat consumption. So right when, at the lowest point of meat consumption in the past 200 plus years, is when heart disease became the leading cause of death, and it has remained the leading cause of death ever since. And it's the leading cause of death all around the world now. So if you had only this evidence to look at, and you were thinking that meat caused heart disease, you would have to conclude from this it's lack of meat that's causing heart disease, right? That's when heart disease hit, was when meat consumption was at its lowest. Now, that's not the argument I'm making. I'm just saying that if that's all you had, that's the logical conclusion you would need to come to. Okay, now this is cancer in the United States, sugar and vegetable oils versus cancer. And if you look on the far left of the curve, you see that in the U.S. in 1811, cancer took only 0.5% of lives. 1 in 188 people died of cancer. This is all published. Everything I give you is published, and all of the data comes from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. We use only the same trusted data that will be published in all journals, nothing less. All right? So 1900, 1 in 17 deaths due to cancer, 5.8% in the U.S. And you can see now we have vegetable oils, and the sugar's going up, right? Look at on the far right, 31.1% of deaths due to cancer, almost 1 in 3. So we went from 1 in 188 deaths due to cancer to 1 in 3 in 200 years. How and why? It's this. Now I can't separate, out which is which here, and I think they're both involved. Okay? Now, this is obesity in the United States, going clear back into the 19th century. And you can see on the far left, obesity in the 19th century was 1.2% in the United States. That's Scott Allen Carson's published work. That was a mountain of work for him to figure that out. But anyway, that's where we were, 1.2%. Now look here, in 1960 we're at 13.4% obesity. This is when we Americans thought we were lean and we were healthy. Not really. Obesity had already risen 11-fold. But look at the correlation to the vegetable oils in the blue there, right? And then by 2018, obesity is 42.5% in the U.S., and we're expected to be at 49.4% obesity by 2030. We're on target. I think we'll probably get there sooner. But look at that correlation to the vegetable oils. Now, let's add sugar in here, because is sugar part of this? Might be. Well, let's start back here in the 19th century. So again, obesity 1.2%. And you can see, vegetable oils were only about 1 to 2 grams a day between 1866 and 1909. But look where the sugars were. By 1907, we exceeded 300 calories a day, 15% of our calories, and yet obesity is 1%. Now, again, 1961, we're at 13.4% obesity, as both vegetable oils and sugar are climbing. And then clear over here on the far right again, obesity 42.5% in 2018, but in lockstep with the vegetable oils. Notice the sugars have been really high since 1920s and didn't change all that much between the 1920s and 2018. Not a very good correlation to the sugars here. Okay, let's move on. So this is more recent data on obesity in the U.S. Beginning in 1961. On the far lower left, let me back up here. On the far lower left, you'll see obesity was 13% in the U.S. in 1961, and by 2018, 42.4%. But I want you to, I'm just highlighted here the sugar. Notice the sugar really hasn't changed very much, but the obesity is in lockstep correlation to the vegetable oils in the blue, right? So you see obesity in the red, vegetable oils in the blue. Now, let's look at the numbers. So during this period, sugars went up 14%, vegetable oils up 230%, and obesity up more than threefold. Okay, we're going to move more recent now, and this is 1999 to 2018, still looking at obesity in the U.S. All right, so you can see in 1999 obesity was 30.5% and elevated to 42.4% by 2018. But here I'm highlighting the trend line for sugar. Notice sugar's on a downward trend. So sugar's been going down in the U.S. somewhere between 1999 and 2004. Sugar has been on a downward trend. So at least since 2004, sugar's going down, and yet obesity is still on the upper, is trending upwards, right? Okay, this is severe obesity in the United States. And you can see it increased from 4.7% all the way up to 9.2% while the sugar declined. So severe obesity doubles while the sugars go down here 8%, vegetable oils up 30%. You say, well, it's the carbohydrates though. Well, so let's look at that. So you can see here carbohydrates have been on the decline in the U.S. from 1997 through 2013, while obesity elevated from about 29% to 38% during that exact same period. So carbohydrates on the decline, fats on the way up. But guess what that fat is? Remember, it's the vegetable oils mostly. We're eating less and less animal fat, more and more vegetable oils. So this is diabetes in the United States. We're going to go clear back into the 19th century. We have some astounding data here, which I just circled here on the lower left. Diabetes in 1890, this is published by the famed Sir William Osler, who wrote the first textbook of medicine for most of the world, but at least for the United States and the English-speaking world. 1890, he published that there was only 2.8 per 100,000 people with diabetes. 0.0028%. Okay, but notice how high sugar is, and already at that point that it's approaching 300 calories per day when we have an extreme low level of diabetes, right? And then if you move forward to 1935, you'll see that sugar consumption exceeded 450 calories a day. The total caloric consumption at that time was about 1,955 calories a day. So guess what? This is 23% of calories, almost a fourth of all calories, sugar, and yet down here at the bottom you'll see this is where diabetes was 0.37%. So that means only 1 in 270 people had diabetes at that point, and the bulk of those were probably type 1, but we don't have exact numbers. Now on the far right we can see today, 2016, we're at 13% diabetes, again in lockstep with the vegetable oil increase. All right. Now this is a page with 100,000 dots in attempt to draw an analogy with 100,000 people where we were in 1890. I tried to highlight 3 of these dots in red in the upper left corner. It's hard to highlight 3 dots out of 100,000, but that's how many people had diabetes essentially in 1890 in the U.S. All right. This is where we are in 2016. That's how many have diabetes. 13,000, we went from 2.8 per 100,000 to 13,000 per 100,000. Now, this is an increase of 4,643-fold over a period of 126 years. Anybody need statistical analysis for this? So, let's go back to 1890. That's how many people we had that were diabetics that year, and this would be just 1,764 diabetics in the U.S. out of 63 million people that year. Okay? If these ratios persisted, there would be just 9,047 people with diabetes in the year 2016 with a population of 323 million. But how many do we have? 34.1 million diabetics today. So we have more than 34 million excess diabetics based on something that's happened between 1890 and 2016. All right, what is that something? Well, I think it's vegetable oils. Take a look here. So we're going to move really close here. This is on the far lower left here. You see how much diabetes we had in 1991, 2.97%. Where does it go to? 13%, again by 2016, same numbers. You see the same numbers and the same data, always the same, doesn't matter where it all comes from. It all comes from the FAO. All right, so, but look at what's happened with the sugar dropping after 1999, right, as the diabetes climbs in lockstep with the vegetable oils. Okay, there's the trend line right there in blue for the vegetable oils, right in lockstep with diabetes. Okay, now, let's look at the United Kingdom. And this is their nutrition experiment. And at the top there you'll see the sugar consumption in the green, and then below that the vegetable oils in blue. And then below is the LA, the linoleic acid, omega-6 linoleic acid in their body fat. You could see it climbing. And obesity climbs from 7% in 1980, fourfold up to 28% by 2019. There's the diabetes, climbs from 2.5% in 1994 to 7.5% by 2019. By the way, all my references are at the bottom of these, if they can fit. We try to get all of them in there, so they're there for you. All right, so now, to make it easier to view this quickly, I just created trend lines, or one of my colleagues created trend lines for this. But this is what happened in the UK. So since 1961, sugar declined 28%, vegetable oils doubled, linoleic acid in the body fat more than doubled, obesity quadrupled, and diabetes tripled as the sugar's going down, right? Okay, let's look at Australia. This is their nutrition experiment. Let's start with sugar at the top. Again, the data from the FAO always comes from 1961 to about 2012. Knyema, K-N-O-E-M-A.com has the FAO data, and they've also had more recent data up to 2018. That's where that more recent data comes from. So here's sugar again. You can see that it is on the decline in Australia. This has been published in multiple papers, by the way. We're not the only ones. All right, I'm sorry, we haven't published this yet. This is coming up in our next paper. But anyway, sugar declining since 1961 in Australia. And you can see the vegetable oils on the incline since 1961, which is what you see in almost every country in the world. We're all doing this, replacing vegetable oils for some other food. And but again, and then you see the obesity climb from 9% in 1980 to 31.3% by 2018, and you can see the curves going up for diabetes and chronic disease. Those are very short curves because that's all the data they had, right? So I wish we could give you more on that. And you say, well, but is it the carbohydrates? Well, here's their carbohydrate consumption, which you can see. I just highlighted there. I'll bring that up once again just to try to highlight. Carbs are declining after 1970. It's not a lot, but the carbs have declined since 1970, again, while the vegetable oils are on the incline. And of course, there's the obesity running from 9% all the way to 31.3%. It goes up more than threefold. All right, and you can see the diabetes on the increase right along with that. They tend to run in lockstep in most cases. Okay, let's look at your country, Israel. All right, so this is your nutrition experiment. And now in Israel, vegetable oil consumption has been really high since as far back as data goes, which is 1950, as far as I'm aware. And as a percentage of total fat, vegetable oil consumption really high here, but a fair amount of that is good oil like olive oil. Now, but anyway, take a look at the vegetable oils in the blue and then the sugar in the green, and you'll see here that right around the same time that the sugar was dropping in Israel, you see a huge climb in the diabetes from 3.4% in 1996 to 9.7% in 2019. All right, obesity really hasn't changed very much because the seed oil consumption, you can see, it isn't really changing dramatically in recent years. All right, but Israel has, again, what I mentioned, the highest relative seed oil consumption in the world. It is currently 94% of all added fat. You can see at the bottom there, I put in butter, ghee, and other added animal fats. They only add up to 6% of the diet for Israelis. Okay, let's look at China briefly, and we'll look at their experiment in nature's laboratory. You'll see here that the vegetable oils are, of course, on the increase like they are almost everywhere. But the sugar, if you look at the y-axis on the far left, you can see the kilocalories per capita per day. Their consumption of sugar is extremely small. That's only 60 to 80 calories per day in recent decades. It is, as you see on the lower right there, China has the 8th lowest sugar consumption in the world. We'll come back to that in a minute. So look at their overweight and obesity, and obesity in the Asian countries is typically, in recent decades, has been, the index is above 25 for them, okay? So, but here's their obesity and overweight and obesity combined, 15.3% in 1991, goes all the way up to 42% by 2015. And here's their cancer. This is cancer incidence, all cancers. Went from 495 per 100,000 people in 1990 all the way to 1,587 per 100,000 in 2017. So it goes up threefold, just like the obesity did, essentially. All right, but all while consuming just 4 to 5 teaspoons of sugar per day, 2.5% of their calories. Again, Americans are currently at 21% of their calories as sugar. So again, this is extremely low sugar consumption. How about New Zealand? Now New Zealand is really interesting because clear back in 1961, their sugar consumption was already sky high. Look at it, 500 calories a day practically, right? And it raises a little bit in recent decades, goes up to almost 600 calories per day. But look at the vegetable oils. It was really low back in 1961, just a couple of grams a day roughly, all right? And then you can see it climbing, but the first obesity data is right there in 1977. It's at 10%. And the obesity climbs all the way to 50% by 2017. But again, right in lockstep with the vegetable oils. Now the Pacific Islanders, they're extremely sensitive to processed foods and vegetable oils, all of them, extraordinarily sensitive to this, and they have the highest obesity in the world in undeveloped nations and the highest levels of diabetes. It is staggering how high they are. All right, let's look at Japan. This is the quintessential nation to illustrate all of these points, which I've been saying since 2016 regarding other conditions mostly, but take a look at this. Now this data runs from 1949 to 2009, but we're going to focus on 1960 to 2009 because 1960 is when they had all the food they could eat, everything they wanted, and you'll see it by the calories. So they were at 2,837 calories. All of this is published, documented, and all the data is, again, from the FAO. So there's the calories, 2,837 in 1960, all the way down to 1,850 calories. Their calories drop a third, okay? Here's their carbohydrates, 84% in 1960 when they were fantastically healthy, one of the probably the healthiest nation in the developed nation in the world for sure. Carbohydrates went down to 56% by 2009. Here's their sugar in 1961, 196, climbed up to 384 calories in 1989, then dropped again. Those lines are not, I just put 3 data points there to kind of keep it a little simpler to read. All right, so but sugar drops down to 282 calories by 2010, and you can see there sugar down 27% between 1989 and 2010, and then here's their total fat towards the bottom in the purple. It was 5% back in 1960 when they were really healthy, and 27% in 2009, and their saturated fat only 7%. It's the lowest in the developed world. All right, now come up to the blue line, the vegetable oils. Where were they? 1961 actually, 81 calories a day, that's 9 grams. That's tolerable. That's where the United States was in 1908. That's the last time we were that low. Okay? Where'd they end up? 351 calories a day. That's 39 grams a day. All right? So what does this do to them? This is obesity in the red curve. So if you just focus in on the red curve, you see obesity in Japan, 16%. Back in 1978, I think that was. We'll get to the actual number, I think, in just a minute. Rises all the way to 31.2%. So obesity doubles in men, but interestingly, while the calories go down, the carbs go down, and the sugar going down, right? But it's in lockstep to the vegetable oils. And so this is diabetes, and we see 1954, 0.02%. It's extremely low in the 1950s. I'm going to have to go quickly here. We're 6.9% by 2009. And you can see again, well, calories, carbohydrates, and sugar all going down, diabetes going through the roof. It's up 345-fold during this period, 1954 to 2007. Sorry, I have to move quickly here, folks. So here's breast cancer, 21.7 per 100,000 back in the 1970s, all the way to 101.4 per 100,000 in 1999. So breast cancer is up 5-fold between 1975 and 1999. Okay? And this is age-related macular degeneration, was only 0.2% in the 1970s, all the way to 16.37% by 2013 that was. Up 82-fold again, while the calories, carbs, and sugar go down, but the vegetable oil going through the roof for them. All right? And I just want to show you here, just highlight, this is what happened to their omega-6. Went from 1% in 1960 to 7.8% in 2009. Okay, so really quickly, the world. This is what's happened to the world's vegetable oils. On the left side is in the blue. It's estimated back in 1865. It was approximately 0 for the world. Not exactly, but really close to 0. And then by 1961, we have the known data beginning in the green. We're at 15.5 grams a day, and then 65.4 grams per person per day by 2014. So a near infinite increase in seed oils. And what happens to us? A near infinite increase in chronic disease. Okay, I have to move quickly. And this is obesity in men globally. We were at 3.2% in 1975, all the way to 10.8% in 2014, in lockstep with vegetable oils, while the sugars are flat. Right? Same thing with women. Rises from 6.4% in 1975 to 14.9%. by 2014, and again, while the sugar is flat, we're going to move on. BMI, body mass index, elevates from 21.7 in 1975, I believe that is, all the way up to 24.2 by 2014. But look at that, in lockstep with vegetable oils, while the carbohydrates are slightly down. All right, and this is average weight gain, 18 pounds for men during this period. And this is women. BMI 22.1 in 1975, all the way to 24.4 by 2014. Again, in lockstep with vegetable oils, while the carbohydrates are essentially, I'd call it flat. All right, average weight gain for women, 14 pounds. And this is diabetes worldwide. It doubles in men, 4.3% to 9%, while the sugars are flat. And this is diabetes in women, doubles, again, while the sugar is flat. Okay? Now, I just want to show you this video, and we're almost done. And this is New York City in 1911, and this is one of the earliest videos made in New York, and I want you to just notice, you can watch this video for a long time, and you'll hardly ever see an overweight or obese person. They are about 1%, just like Scott Allen Carson's work found. Now, these people didn't know anything about nutrition. They had never heard of vitamins. They hadn't been theorized until the year after that, 1912, by Casimir Funk. These people weren't afraid of saturated fat or polyunsaturated fat or carbs or sugar or anything, as far as we know, for the most part. What were they eating? Their diet was meat heavy because they didn't have refrigeration in their homes until typically the 1930s, so they didn't have a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. They ate lots of potatoes. 35% of the diet was grains, most of that being wheat. There was, again, obesity, 1%, type 2 diabetes, virtually unknown. There was 5 cases of Alzheimer's disease in the world. Macular degeneration was rare. I could go on and on. They're really very healthy in terms of chronic disease, but what did they not have in their food? They only had 1 gram of seed oils for the previous 45 years on average. Where are we today, 104 years later, 2005? 40% of Americans look a lot like this. I'm sad to say. And you know what? It's because 86% of their added fat are coming from vegetable oils, not animal fat. They were replaced, right? That means these people are innocent victims. Whether men, women, or children, we're innocent victims of the food supply, all right? Because these are chronic metabolic biological poisons. And the vegetable oils are killing us. They're hidden everywhere, like you see in this picture. And Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled. We've been fooled for 60 years. It's time to open our eyes and see this for what it really is. So just like a tornado ripping through a city, this is what vegetable oils do to us. They leave behind a trail of destruction wherever they go. So I represent Cure AMD Foundation and Ancestral Health Foundation. And I want to thank Dr. Mariella Glant and Ariel, the founders of this organization, Metabolics. And I want to thank all of you. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Shalom.